Hey, this is Design Fundamentals, Lecture 1, and what we're going to be doing here is basically introducing the whole concept of design and creativity, and then kind of give a almost an overview of the rest of the quarter in terms of the issues and elements and topics we'll be talking about and applying. And so we will begin with a brief discussion on what design is, and then launch into the basic elements and principles of design, and then end up talking about a couple of those initial elements. So our first question is, what is design? People have a variety of responses to this, and a lot of times that includes things like self-expression, and it's being creative, it is making things pretty, it's decoration, things like that. So there's a variety of responses that people generally have to that question. And what we're looking at to bring everybody to the same table is the definition of design as being a planned arrangement of elements that form a visual pattern. Design is not fine art, and as we go through this course, I think that will become very clear to you, because design involves more than self-expression. It involves more than creative choices. There's a functionality to it. So design is planned. You're making arrangements, putting things together, relating things to each other in a way that's going to be effective for the outcome, for the desired result of the design. And there's a visual result to that. Anything that we do visually, of course, is going to have a visual result. Design involves deliberate choices. It's not whimsical. It's not, okay, it just landed there, or I decided to put it there just because. There are always whys and wherefores in design, so it is actually not a right brain activity, it's a whole brain activity. You're using analysis, you're evaluating, you're making judgment calls, you are making assessments and things like that as you are being creative. So it's left brain and right brain in nature. Another question we'd like to look at is, what is creativity, since design is a creative pursuit and it involves that creative process. And again, responses to this can vary. A lot of times creativity is defined as something that results in a piece of artwork, or it's an artsy-craftsy thing, or it's a right brain activity. Looking at that definition, creativity is just basically the ability to bring something into being, to innovate, to originate, to come up with a new idea, to look at something that already exists and make it better. Creativity involves the processes of thinking, looking and observing, and also doing. So there is a kind of a three-legged stool that goes on when somebody's being creative. Another thing about creativity is that it is inherent to human beings, and every human being is creative. That does not mean that everybody can draw, does not mean that everybody should be a designer or a fine artist or a photographer or a writer. What it means is that every human being, no matter what their bent, has the ability to be creative. Accountants are creative, auto mechanics are creative, dancers are creative, engineers, architects are creative, teachers are creative. So it's the ability to come up with a new idea, new ways of thinking, to make something new and original, to invent, and so forth. So creativity is a character trait that's inherent in every human being, and it's just how it's expressed is what's different from person to person. And then this is the big question: what is aesthetics? The general answer to this is that that aesthetics are somebody's personal preferences, what somebody likes and what somebody dislikes. aesthetics is generally seen as a personal subjective understanding. I like blue, but I don't like red. I like this, this makes me uncomfortable, things like that. But in reality, aesthetics is the theory of beauty, what makes something pleasing, compelling, beautiful, interesting to look at. And aesthetics is actually something that is universal and basically exists for all people in all places in all times. Aesthetics as a study includes the forms and organizing principles of design. It also includes the concept of excellence. Anything that is beautiful is regarded as having a quality of excellence. Human beings don't deal with ugly really well. We get confused, we get insecure, we feel unstable around ugliness, and ugly is basically disorder and chaos. So beauty is the opposite of that. And there is beauty by the same systems, thousands of years ago as today. And so aesthetics as a set of, shall we say, principles is kind of a standard thing. Think of aesthetics as like if it's a written language. You have nouns, you have verbs, you have certain ways of structuring sentences, you have certain ways of using words together to bring meaning to what you're trying to communicate. And so there's certain principles you follow to do that. And in the visual language, you have those same kinds of principles, and they are foundational, and that's what aesthetics are. That's the topic of this class. We're going to be studying aesthetics. So that brings us to this question: what's the difference between aesthetics and style? Because very often we talk about a certain artist's or designer's aesthetic, and what we're talking about there is their style. And there's a difference between the concept of aesthetics as a set of principles and forms and guidelines, and style, which is actually how those principles and forms are used or interpreted. So we can look at the Lundgren here and the Picasso and the Kandinsky, and each one is vastly different from the other. Each one is non-objective or abstract, but each one uses aesthetic principles actually in the same way, but expresses differently. So we have color and balance and value here, and we have color and balance and value, and we have color and balance and value. So there's commonality to each of these three pieces. And so each artist has created the work in their own style, but following aesthetics. So style is the manner in which we apply aesthetic principles. Style can indicate a particular designer, such as Saul Bass or Milton Glaser, or William Morris. A particular period. Is it the Industrial Revolution? Is it the Carolingian period? Is it Rococo? A certain place. There's the New York School versus the Memphis School. A certain culture. The Maori tribal artwork and designs are very different from Polynesian artwork, which is very different from Western European-based artwork and design. So those are different styles. Style is the distinctive appearance of a work, based on how the aesthetic principles are used, and also a particular category of form as opposed to, or like modern versus Eastern versus Western versus Baroque, things like that. So style is the application of aesthetics to design and art, architecture, writing, things like that. And it's the style that is subjective. It is the style that is personal, but the aesthetics are universal. And as we go forward, here's some ideas to take a look at and to think about and be thoughtful about. Design has purpose. Design is not fine art, and it is not self-expression. You are not designing for yourself. You are designing for a function, to communicate something, to accommodate a need, to solve a problem. Design includes a variety of disciplines, and that means that it's not just graphic design or visual communication. There is, of course, within that, there's print design and web design and interactive and things like that, but there's also fashion design, interior design, architecture, certain forms of engineering, certain forms of sculpture, transportation design, industrial design, product design, packaging design. So there's all of these disciplines, all of these areas of focus within the design field overall. So it's good to have the understanding that there's that kind of breadth in the discipline. Design combines form, which are the elements that we're going to be studying in this class, and content, which is what you're trying to express or communicate. And the content lends toward the purpose. Design involves seeing and perception, or what we call apprehension, which is I see it, and then comprehension, which is what is it, and what does it do, and what does it mean to me, and how can I, make it better, or what do I do with this thing. Design incorporates aesthetics and function. It's a marriage. It's a true blending. It's not necessarily aesthetics on the left-hand side and function on the right-hand side, and they walk together down the road. Aesthetics and function work together as if you are making a cake. And maybe aesthetics is the eggs and function is the oil. Once you have them blended together, you cannot separate them again. So design is that true blending, that true marriage of those two issues. Design seeks order, not chaos. I said previously that we don't like ugly, we're uncomfortable with it. And one of the things you can think about is if you've been in an area where there's been a disaster, like the recent earthquakes in Haiti and Chile, the Hurricane Katrina and its effects in Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas, the disorder, the absolute total chaos that was going on after that, and how people were perplexed and befuddled and didn't know where to begin, and still are having to go through that rebuilding process. There is a psychological and emotional impression upon a person when they are surrounded by disorder and chaos. And we don't get along with it well. We seek order. We like things that are beautiful, not ugly. Another idea to consider, and this is one that some of you might struggle with a bit, is that to really design well, the appropriate use of formal elements and the relational concepts, those principles, need to become intuitive. And we struggle with that at first because when we're learning something new, we have to think of everything all at once, and we have to think of individual things. Okay, now I should do this, and this needs to go over here because of this, and this needs to do that, and so forth. But with practice, with experience, those things become inherent, and they become just your normal way of thinking, so you no longer have to think of them specifically. If you drive, when you learn to drive a car, you were thinking, okay, put on the seatbelt, start the car, signal, look both ways, make sure the traffic is clear, ease out of the parking slot, and so forth. So you were thinking of every move that you had to make. After you were driving for a year, 2, 3, 5, whatever, you do it intuitively. Your reactions are more responsive. Just, you see something, you don't even think, okay, I've got to slow down. Your foot just goes to the brake pedal. And you can listen to the radio, you can have a conversation, you can eat In-N-Out burgers, things like that while you're driving, because now that driving process has become inherent and intuitive. That same issue is necessary for a designer to really design well. Because once you have all those things incorporated into you, it becomes part of you, and you can put your focus on, okay, solving the problem and doing really excellent stuff, because all the other stuff is in you, and all you need to do is draw it out, and it comes out automatically. So that's not going to happen at first. You need to give yourself some time, and you need to apply yourself. It does not happen automatically. You have to make the effort to make it intuitive. This course is oriented toward two-dimensional design, which for graphic designers includes the print realm, and also web design and multimedia, because generally we are working in two aspects, height and width. So two-dimensional design deals with basically flatness, measured distance in two directions. We have a vertical aspect and a horizontal aspect, and there's a start and stop to those distances vertically and horizontally, and it's flat, and it's considered pictorial space, not sculptural space. So if we're looking at the Leyendecker illustration here on the right-hand side, we see basically an illustration, a picture of a knight, and he's kneeling, and we've got letter forms, and we've got space divided and framed out and so forth. And it's a picture. It's not something you can walk around. You can't see the guy's left shoulder, so to speak. So it's pictorial space. Three-dimensional design, on the other hand, is born out of two-dimensional design in terms of that's where the concepts begin. But we now have a third aspect, which is the transverse. That gives us the depth. Three-dimensional design is truly volumetric. It is not virtual space. It's actual volumetric space that we can walk around, we can move through, and is considered sculptural and not pictorial. We don't deal with three-dimensional design in this class in terms of the principles and the elements and the projects that we're dealing with. But understand that graphics is very often applied to three-dimensional objects, such as packaging and display design, things like that. And so there is a strong relationship between two dimensions and three dimensions, but we will be focusing in the two-dimensional realm. So two-dimensional design involves elements and principles, and that's what we will be working with in this class. We will be talking about the process of design. Any process involves time. Oh goody. It involves ideation, which is the new word for what used to be known as concept development. Thinking about various ways to solve problems, brainstorming, things like that. It involves critical thinking, meaning the ability to look at something and analyze it and make meaning out of it and use it, but also to look at your own work and say, is it good or bad? Is it solving the problem? Is it going to be useful for the client or to my company or whoever I'm doing the design for? Is it going to reach the audience and speak to the audience in the right way? Design involves solving problems, and problems are not like things that necessarily need to be fixed, but in the way they are, it's more like, okay, I have a need to brand my business. Will you help me do that? I have the need to put this object in a package so it can be sold and transported safely to various retail outlets where it can be sold, and so then that's the problem to be solved. And it also involves revisions, and I say lots of revisions because any process you constantly need to evaluate, are you staying on track, and if not, you need to stop and revise. Or maybe you could take this a little further, or maybe you could take make a few changes over here to make the piece stronger, things like that. So the first thing you land on in terms of a design solution is not necessarily the best solution for the design problem. And that's something we look at as well, and that's something that's also related to how you go about your process. So you're going to be dealing with not just the theories and the application, but the application of the theories involves a process that you go through. It involves time. It involves coming up with ideas. It involves evaluating those ideas based on the given problem and then making changes as needed. Okay, so that was your basic introduction. And so now we're going to jump into design elements and principles as basically an introduction to the big picture of the specifics we'll be studying over the quarter. In design fundamentals, there are particular elements that we deal with, and the formal elements are those things which are actually visible or tangible. And so formal relates to the idea of something having form or having shape or having a visual presence or identity. So formal relates to form. And the formal elements are point, line, shape, plane, volume, color, texture, and space. And so any design will have these formal elements in them in some way or another. Point is basically a position in space, any location. So if I put my cursor over here, that's a different point than putting it over here. And over here, this location has a certain relationship to the top edge of the screen, to the bottom edge, to the side, and to the left-hand side, and also has a certain relationship to the other elements on this page. Position is indicated by a dot as such, and it is considered to have no dimension. If we don't have the dot, we still have position. So this dot is on this location. If I move my cursor here, it's a different location, but there's no dot there. But that location still exists. And this location exists, and this location exists. So within any design space, there are millions of possibilities for locations or positions or points. So if I go from point A to point B, I now have a connection between 2 points, or to get from point A to point B, I actually have to move in some direction. So line is now created by connecting 2 points. A line will begin at point A and end at point B, or it can go on to point C and D and so forth. Line is one-dimensional. It has direction. So line is defined as the path of a point in motion, because to make a line you actually have to plop your pencil or your cursor or your pen or your brush at one position, one point in the design space, and move it to another point. And so there's always movement that goes along with the idea of line. Shape is line doubled back on itself and closed. So we call it an enclosed line. It's a two-dimensional area that is bounded by line. So we can see the rectangle shape in here because it's surrounded by gray lines. So this is the shape, and the lines are the boundaries of that. And or we see these shapes not because they are outlined, they don't have lines around them, but they are a different color than the background. Shape has 2 dimensions. That's the height and the width. A plane also has 2 dimensions. It's an understood or actual area. Planes are flat. A shape is a plane that's visible. And a shape is a part of a plane. Planes actually exist into infinity. If you're looking at this on your desktop, and if you put your hand, if your computer is on a table, if you put your hand on the top of the table meets an invisible two-dimensional plane that actually exists at the same level from the floor plane all the way across the room that you're in. If you put your hand to touch the bottom of the table, the tabletop, that's on a plane a couple inches lower or an inch lower or whatever than the top plane of the table. And so planes exist all over the place. They're horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and they are flat, And we will be talking about a foreground plane, a midground plane, a background plane, a picture plane, things like that. So plane is basically actual, meaning we actually see its boundaries, or understood, meaning we don't, two-dimensional area. And it is always flat. A sphere has no planes. There's no flatness on a ball or a sphere. Volume is the idea of having three dimensions, height, width, and depth. In two-dimensional understanding, volume is an illusion. And so we can create the sense of, okay, this is a box, and it's transparent, we can see through it, and say this is the front plane, and it is outlined, so there's this rectangular shape there. Then there's this parallelogram shape going back, recognizing the transverse, and it's echoed over here. And then we have the back plane, which parallels the front plane. And then we have the top plane, which is also a parallelogram sort of in this drawing. And then the bottom plane, which is also a parallelogram. So with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shapes, we have created the illusion of a three-dimensional form in a two-dimensional space. So volume two-dimensionally is an illusion. Color is change in lightness or darkness, or change in chroma. So we see the yellow and the green and the red here. Color is an element of design that is complex enough to have its own course. So you get to take color theory because it is that big a deal. There are emotive psychological effects. We use color to symbolize certain things. If you're seeing red in Western culture, you are angry. Or if you are feeling blue, you are not feeling so well. If you're in the pink, you're feeling pretty cheerful. Yellow journalism is not looked upon favorably in our culture. In other cultures, yellow is a color of happiness or of good fortune and things like that. Green is generally understood as a color of health. There's also scientific aspects. We have color spaces, we have RGB versus CMYK, we have light waves and amplitudes and things like that. And color profiles that you work with on your computer are scientifically defined. So color is highly complex. Then there's texture, which is basically the idea of surface quality. Anything that you can hold in your hand, run into, stand against, stand on, any object, anything that physically exists as a form has a surface and therefore has texture. And texture can be smooth or it can be rough. And we can do texture by virtue of actual physical highs and lows in the surface, but there's also a visual understanding, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about texture. And then space is basically measured distance. I've already alluded to the idea that there is a height and width ratio aspect. There's a measurement. If you have an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, we know that that's a standard U.S. American size for paper. It's different in other countries, but there's still a measured distance. If you're using an A4 or a B3 size paper, there's still an aspect ratio, there's still a size that is measured. Relational elements are the ways we relate the formal elements to each other. One of them is direction. Something is horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. And direction counts for a lot in design. It's a balance issue, it's a movement issue, it's a rhythm issue, and so forth. So direction is really important. Vertical is plumb. It's the kind of vertical you get if you take a plumb line, which is the architect's or builder's weight with the point at the end, and you drop it straight from a distance to see if everything lines up against it. So vertical is directly perpendicular to your ground plane. Horizontal is perfectly level. So vertical is plumb, horizontal is level. Anything that is not horizontal or vertical exactly will be diagonal, even if it's a degree off. And diagonal has a different sensibility to it than vertical or horizontal. We'll talk about those when we talk about compositional stress. Position, we've already talked about point, which is an indicator of position, but position is a relational element as well. It's determined by the relationship of something to the entire design and to each other element within a design. Space is measured distance, so space is also relational as well as formal. So we understand we've got space here, and that's measured, but it's different than this space. Weight and gravity are perceptions in two-dimensional design. The idea of certain shapes being more weighty, certain colors being more weighty than others is means by which we will balance things in a design. Weight tends toward the idea of stability or instability, balance, imbalance, or unbalance. A frame is actually the perimeter of the design space. It's the edge of the paper you work on. It is the limits of the web page that you're designing. The frame is the perimeter or the boundary. It's like the fence around the area. It is the basis for the structure. So we'll talk about a picture, a plane. We'll talk about framing and composition given a frame of reference. A picture plane is the area that exists inside the frame. So if this is the fence, this is the pasture within it. This is everything that goes on within the frame. And so this is the active area where your composition exists. Then we have organizing principles, and I won't go into these in detail at this point because we will attack them in a big way as we go. But just to introduce you to the words: balance, pattern, emphasis, rhythm, scale, repetition, motion, time, harmony and variety, the idea of unity, structure versus composition, and the relationship between the two. And then there's practical elements, which are the issues that solve the problem, so to speak. That would be the meaning, the representation, and the function. The meaning behind the design is it can be humorous, it can be sobering, it can be serious, it can be ideological. It's basically what you're trying to communicate, but the overall concept between the specifics. The representation is the idea of what is actually in the piece that's helping communicate. And then we have function. What is this for? What is this meaning to do? So every design has a function, a purpose that it needs to achieve, or else it's really not design. And if it doesn't achieve the function, it doesn't work. It's failing in its purpose. And so we use the formal, relational, and principles to support the meaning, the representation, and the function. So we have here a highly manipulative dog panel cartoon. And most people think, well, that's just a panel cartoon. This is a design class, why are we looking at this? Well, let's break this down. We have a line that is actually defining the frame of reference. It's a hand-drawn line, but it's there. And we have other lines in this piece. We have lines here, and we have lines here, and so forth. And so there's movements and directions. We have lines back here. We have shapes. The lines are forming shapes here. And so we have bushy shapes here and here. and we have cloud shapes, and we have a dog shape, and a tree shape, and a house shape, and a fence shape, and a sign shape, and ground, and a dog bowl, and so forth. We have color. We have black versus white, and that involves color. There's the idea of texture. We see the lines used to create a sense of texture in the wood. We've got the shrubbery texture, we've got the leaf texture, we've even got the goofy dog texture going on, we've got the texture of the slats in the house siding. So there's textural elements there. We have this relationship to the bowl and the tree, and the understood distance. He's in the background, this is in the foreground. So we have a plane and we have another plane, and the house side is kind of in the middle, so there's a mid-ground plane. The dog is smaller in scale than the sign. That indicates a distance. The dog has a scale relationship to the bush, things like that. So everything in here has aesthetic principles applied to create the overall idea, which means that there's a really friendly dog. This is not a beware of dog. This is a highly manipulative dog, which means he's kind of goofy and friendly. And the function of this is to make somebody laugh, to amuse, and it's kind of like to joke or whatever. It's a panel cartoon. It's entertainment. It's amusement. So the representation in here is, this incident. You get the idea that you're the viewer. You're getting the dog has seen you. He's wagging his tail. He's going to come trotting over, and so what are you going to do about it? That type of thing. So in this little cartoon that probably didn't take that long to draw, probably within half an hour to an hour, all of these elements and principles are working together. Also notice there's nothing in here that is level or vertical. There's no horizontal, there's no verticality, there's all diagonal. And there's a reason that it's all diagonal. I'll just leave you to think about that.